An ambulance, with its siren wailing and lights flashing, stopped near the office located in a standalone building. "Come quickly! He's in there!" A worried woman led the medics inside. "And who are you to him?" the doctor asked on the go. "I'm his assistant, his secretary," the woman replied. "I came to work, and he was lying there, unable to breathe. I had to open all the windows in the office and call you." The woman led the medics to a room where a young businessman lay on a couch. His shirt was unbuttoned at the chest. "I did that," the assistant said, blushing. "You did the right thing," the doctor reassured her. The doctor checked his pulse, lifted his eyelids, and instructed the paramedic to bring a stretcher. "Stretcher. Into the garage, in the basement. Call the staff, quickly." "And what about Michael?" the woman asked anxiously. "Carbon monoxide poisoning," the doctor replied as he moved the businessman onto the stretcher. Once the patient was loaded into the ambulance, the driver switched on the siren and they sped toward the hospital. Upon arrival, Michael was immediately admitted to the ICU and placed on a ventilator. The fight for his life began. "Oh, girls, what a man they've brought us," sighed one of the reception nurses. "Such a handsome guy." "Carbon monoxide poisoning. Let's hope he doesn't turn into a fool if he pulls through. Or worse, a vegetable." "Stop it!" her colleague Kathy scolded, waving her hand. "Don't you dare say such things." Kathy shook her head. She still couldn't get used to the cynical remarks of her co-workers. She felt sorry for every patient. "You'll end up as one of our patients yourself if you keep taking things to heart," her colleagues often warned her. But Kathy couldn't help herself, and that's why patients loved her. Even after being discharged, many would come back to thank her, bringing flowers, chocolates and fruit. She had started working in the hospital before completing her medical studies. It was connected to a tragedy. A year ago, her older sister Lily and Lily's fiancé had died in a car accident. Lily had left behind a 9-year-old son, Anthony. She had never disclosed who the boy's father was. After the funeral, Anthony was very quiet. Looking at his grandparents, he softly said, "The kids at school told me they'll send me to an orphanage now." This statement caught the elderly couple off guard. They exchanged worried glances, unprepared for such concerns from the child. They were grieving their daughter's death so intensely that they hadn't had the time or strength to think about how they would care for their grandson. "Anthony, that's not true," his grandfather tried to assure him. But the boy grew upset and suddenly started sobbing. "Please don't send me away. I'll behave, I promise. I'll stay home. I'll take care of Grandma and Grandpa." That heart-wrenching monologue was overheard by Kathy, who had just returned from university. "Anthony, what are you saying?" She ran to the boy, hugging him tightly. "No one will send you anywhere. I promise you that." The family council decided that Kathy would take custody of her nephew. "I'll go to work," she declared firmly. "They'll take me as a nurse. I can finish school later." "Kathy, my dear, you're just a year away from graduating," her mother lamented. "Mum, right now, we need money more," Kathy replied resolutely. "We can't survive on just one pension for the 4 of us. That's final." And so, Anthony stayed with the family, and Kathy started working at the city hospital. After a challenging day at work, Kathy couldn't stop thinking about the new patient, Michael. She felt relieved when a nurse from the ICU asked her to fill in for a few hours. During her shift, Kathy peeked into Michael's ICU room to take a look at him. Even unconscious, pale and with a slight stubble, the man looked attractive. High forehead, thick eyelashes, well-defined lips. "Don't give up. Someone is waiting for you." "Someone loves you," she said, adjusting his blanket. As she left, she brushed his hand gently but did nothing more and walked out of the room. Michael felt as if he were wandering through a maze filled with a gelatinous substance. Occasionally, lights flickered at the end of the tunnel but then vanished just as quickly. Periodically, a shrill beeping sound echoed around him. He tried to escape, but an invisible force seemed to hold him back. Suddenly, everything changed. He heard a voice calling out to him. It was soft and warm, a voice that made him want to see the person it belonged to. His eyelids felt heavy as lead, but he sensed a powerful force pulling him out of the darkness. When he finally managed to open his eyes, he caught a glimpse of a nurse in uniform just as the door closed behind her. "Girls, the patient in the ICU has regained consciousness." One of the nurses burst into the staff room. Kathy was surprised. Just 15 minutes earlier, the man had shown no signs of awareness. "He's even asking for the nurse who was in his room earlier," the nurse added. Kathy tensed. She was the only one who had been in his room earlier, but there was no reason to worry. She had done nothing but adjust his blanket and say a few words. Summoning her courage, she went to see the patient. "How are you feeling?" she asked cautiously as she approached his bed. Instead of irritation or annoyance, she saw a weak but genuine smile. "It's you," the man whispered. "You pulled me out of the maze." Kathy didn't understand what he meant, but quickly clarified, "I only adjusted your blanket." "But you spoke to me," he insisted, "told me to fight." Kathy blushed and, as if apologizing, added, "I'm very glad you regained consciousness." She sighed with relief. Deep down, she thought to herself, he doesn't seem like a fool. Michael was moved from the ICU to a regular room. Kathy often saw him while performing her duties at work. During her free time, she occasionally stopped by his room to say goodbye before heading home. "You're like a breath of fresh air for me," Michael remarked during one of their conversations. "At this rate, I'll be discharged in no time." "That's wonderful," Kathy smiled. But the thought of his upcoming discharge made her feel unexpectedly sad. Later, representatives from Michael's insurance company and police officers came to see him. They explained that his poisoning had been caused by a malfunction in the ventilation system of the garage beneath his office. Because of the issue, his car's engine had been idling and emitting carbon monoxide, which filled the enclosed space. "You're very lucky there was no one else there," the officer concluded, "and you should thank your secretary. She opened the windows and called the ambulance in time." Michael expressed his gratitude to everyone responsible, but his thoughts were entirely occupied by Kathy. Time passed, and Michael's discharge day was approaching. Throughout his stay, he'd been thinking about how to talk to Kathy. He realized that over these weeks, he had grown attached to her and didn't want to part ways, but he didn't know if she felt the same way. "Get it together, weakling. You're 36 years old, a successful businessman, and you're acting like a teenager." He mentally scolded himself, lying in his hospital bed, but doubts kept creeping in. What if she's married, or already has children? He thought back to a long-forgotten feeling. The last time he had fallen in love was 10 years ago. She had been 20 and he, 26. The girl was naive, sensitive, impulsive. They had shared many wonderful moments, but one day she unexpectedly disappeared from his life, leaving only bitter memories. "All right. Tomorrow I'll definitely talk to her," he decided firmly, practically assigning himself the task like it was part of a business plan. The next day, when Kathy came into his room, it was as if all his courage vanished. "Michael, congratulations! You're being discharged today," she said with a bright smile. "You can go home now, and you can come by tomorrow for your paperwork." "Thank you," he managed to say. "Kathy, can I talk to you for a moment?" "Of course. What's on your mind?" she asked, her smile fading slightly as she sat down next to his bed. "I'd like to see you again," he murmured. "But not here, not in the hospital." "Are you asking me out on a date?" Kathy asked, surprised and a little delighted. Michael nodded. "Yes, exactly." "Well, yes, I'd like that," she replied softly, her eyes sparkling with joy. "Then I'll take care of some things and call you," he said, trying to sound composed, though inwardly he was exhilarated. The day passed, but Michael didn't call. Kathy began to fret. Why would he want someone like me? There's a 12-year age difference. Maybe he got bored of me already. But in the evening, her phone finally rang. Kathy, good evening, it's Michael. I'm sorry for calling so late, I just couldn't wait until morning. Meeting you has become too important to me. Are you free tomorrow? Yes, I'm off tomorrow, she replied, her voice calm, though her heart was soaring with joy. They agreed to meet at the entrance to the city park. The next morning, Kathy was in high spirits. But just as she was getting ready for the date, she noticed suitcases in the hallway. "Mom, Dad, what are these bags for?" she asked, peeking into her parents' room. "Your father and I are going to a resort," her mom announced happily. "We almost forgot to tell you. We're leaving for a week. It's such a joy to finally take a break. Don't worry about us. Just take care of yourself and Anthony." Kathy was happy for her parents, but now she had to figure out what to do about her nephew. "Anthony, want to come to the park with me?" she asked, peeking into his room. "Where? The park?" he asked, pausing his video game. "Yes, to the park." At the park, Michael stood by the entrance, waiting for her. When he saw Kathy walking over with a boy, his smile faltered slightly. "Is that her son? Is she married?" he wondered. Kathy waved at him and smiled. As she approached, she nudged the boy forward. "This is Anthony. Sorry I had to bring him along. My parents left and there was no one to watch him. You don't mind, do you?" "Of course not," Michael replied, though his smile seemed a bit stiff at first. "Is he your son?" "No!" Kathy burst out laughing. "He's my nephew. My sister Lily had him when she was 20. So don't you start accusing me of anything." Michael exhaled in relief. Once Anthony ran off to ride the carousel, they were left alone. "Kathy, I'm such an idiot," Michael admitted. "I should have just asked you outright instead of jumping to conclusions. Let's blame it on the aftermath of the carbon monoxide poisoning." Kathy laughed and then told him about her sister, her tragic death, and how she had taken custody of Anthony. She spoke openly and honestly. That day marked the beginning of their closeness. After a joyful walk, lunch at a cafe, and watching a cartoon in the cinema, both felt that something deeper had started to connect them. Michael began visiting their home more often. Kathy introduced him to her parents. One day, while looking at family photos displayed around the house, Michael froze. His eyes landed on one particular photograph. "Is this Lily?" he asked, pointing to the image of the young woman. "Yes, that's my sister," Kathy replied. "Did you know her? She was my first love," Michael said quietly. A tense silence hung in the air. He looked up and suddenly asked, "Anthony, is he my son?" Kathy's mother stiffened but cautiously admitted, "Lily told us she wanted to tell her boyfriend about the baby." But her friend convinced her that he had supposedly left her for someone else. Michael exhaled deeply, his emotions overwhelming him. He realized that a misunderstanding had shattered their relationship. "If only I had known," he murmured, his voice trembling slightly. He turned to Kathy and asked, "Why didn't she tell me?" Kathy remained silent. That question was weighed down by more pain than any simple truth could explain. Kathy stared at Michael, overwhelmed and shaken. The words she had just heard turned her world upside down. Michael, her friend, her potential life partner, turned out to be Anthony's father. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered, looking away. "Why didn't Lily tell you? Why didn't you know?" "Because some toxic circle of lies ruined everything," Michael said darkly. "We broke up because of rumors that turned out to be false. Her friend told her that I was cheating on her, and I was told that she had lost interest in me. And then it all just fell apart. I tried to fix things, but by the time I decided to look for her, she had disappeared." Kathy listened, her heart aching. Perhaps Lily had never learned the truth, and things could have been so different. "I need time," Kathy finally said. "This isn't just about us anymore, it's about Anthony. I made myself a promise to protect him no matter what." Michael nodded in understanding. I get it, but I can't walk away. Now that I know, I can't just turn my back." He looked at her with intensity in his eyes, but his voice was gentle. "Anthony is my son, and I want to be part of his life. He deserves to know the truth." Kathy bowed her head slightly. "All right, but step by step. He's only 9. "Step by step," Michael agreed. Michael's initial efforts to connect with Anthony were anything but easy. The boy was cautious and didn't understand why this new person was suddenly spending so much time in their home. One day, Anthony asked Kathy, "Is this going to be my new dad?" Kathy swallowed hard and replied, "No, not yet. But he really wants to be your friend, Anthony. Give him a chance." At first, Michael started with small gestures. He offered to help Anthony build a wooden model airplane that could fly. Initially, the boy watched lazily as Michael laid out all the parts. But as they began gluing the wings and attaching the propeller, Anthony grew more interested. "You're really good at this," Michael said, noticing Anthony confidently handling the tools. "I learned with Grandpa," the boy said proudly. "Well, in that case, we're definitely going to make this work," Michael replied with a warm smile. From then on, they began to bond. The Michael and Anthony team could often be seen working together, sometimes on a project in the garage, other times tinkering with something in the backyard. Kathy had been worried that Anthony might become too attached to Michael too quickly, but watching her nephew grow happier and more open dissolved her fears bit by bit. One evening, just as Michael was about to leave, Anthony suddenly asked him, "When are you coming back?" The question caught Michael off guard, but he quickly answered, "Whenever you want me to." "Tomorrow morning?" the boy asked softly. They both laughed. By this point, Kathy had long known that Michael was holding true to his promise. He wasn't rushing, but he was doing everything he could to become part of their lives. Late that night, after Anthony had gone to bed, Michael sat across from Kathy at the kitchen table. "Kathy," he said seriously, "I think it's time to tell him the truth." She sighed. "Are you sure?" "Yes, I'm sure. He deserves to know." Kathy looked down for a moment, then back up at Michael. "All right, but I want to be there with him, to support him." On Sunday evening, the family sat down for dinner. After they finished eating, Kathy gently steered the conversation toward an important subject. "Anthony," she began carefully, "Uncle Michael has something very important he wants to tell you." The boy looked at her, then turned to Michael. "What is it?" Michael took a deep breath, then met Anthony's gaze. "Anthony, this isn't easy to explain, but there's something you need to know. I'm your father." A few seconds of silence filled the room as the boy's wide eyes stayed glued to Michael. "Really?" Anthony finally asked. "Really," Michael said, his voice steady but soft. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" The boy squinted, trying to understand. Michael gently explained that he hadn't known about Anthony's existence until very recently. He told him how the truth had come to light and how, from that moment, he'd wanted to be there for him. Anthony remained quiet for a long time and then asked, "Are you going to stay with us now?" Michael reached out cautiously and placed a hand on Anthony's shoulder. "Yes, Anthony. I'm not going anywhere now." The boy nodded, his face slowly breaking into a small, thoughtful smile. "That's good," he said quietly. Kathy covered her face with her hands as emotions overwhelmed her, relief, happiness, and a sense of completion all at once. Months passed, and everything began to change. Michael became an integral part of Anthony and Kathy's life. Together, they developed new traditions, playing board games, taking trips to the countryside, and enjoying long walks in the park. Anthony often referred to Michael as his dad, sometimes even with pride in his voice. One evening, over cups of tea, Kathy remarked, "You've changed, Michael. You're not the same person you were." "For the better?" he asked, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "For the better," she replied softly, her eyes sparkling with emotion. Michael reached across the table and gently took her hand. Months ago they had been strangers, but now, sitting there, both felt like they'd become a family. "You've given me a family, Kathy," he whispered, "and for that, I'll always be grateful." She didn't need words to respond. Her gaze said it all. Weeks passed, and their lives settled into a new rhythm. Michael began staying for dinner more often, and on weekends, the three of them, Michael, Kathy, and Anthony, would cheerfully head out for movie nights or park outings. Anthony, who had once been hesitant, now opened himself up completely to his father, their bond growing stronger each day. But Kathy sensed that Michael had something even deeper on his mind. There was a warmth in the way he looked at her, hints of a thought he hadn't yet voiced, something important that lingered just beneath the surface. One evening, Michael asked her, "I have something for you. Will you take a walk with me?" Kathy was surprised by the unexpected proposal, but agreed, leaving Anthony at home with her parents. They strolled together down a lantern-lit path lined with autumn leaves. Cool air surrounded them, but it wasn't cold enough to be uncomfortable. "So much has happened over these past few months," Michael said, slowing his steps. "And you've changed my life in ways I never thought possible." "You've changed mine too," Kathy replied, smiling as she looked at him. "You didn't just change my life," he continued, his half-smile growing warmer. "You gave me a family. You showed me that I could be a good father, and more than anything, you're the person I want to be with forever." Kathy froze in place. The sincerity in his eyes held her captive. Michael stopped walking and reached into his coat pocket to pull out a small box. "Kathy, I spent so long thinking I'd never find the right person, someone who truly understands me and accepts me. And now I know I've found her. I don't want to wait any longer." He opened the box, revealing a sparkling diamond ring. "Will you marry me?" Kathy froze, her heart seemingly stopping. She looked at Michael, then at the ring, and finally down, trying to gather her thoughts. "Michael, this is so unexpected." "I know," he interrupted, taking a step closer to her, "and I know you might be scared. None of this is easy. Anthony, your life, the past. But I'm certain of one thing. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, and I promise I'll make you happy." Tears welled up in Kathy's eyes. She laughed softly, covering her face with one hand, and whispered, "You have no idea how much you've changed my life." Kathy stepped closer to him, took his hand, and looking into his eyes said, "Yes, I will." Michael smiled so widely that it seemed his heart might burst with happiness. He gently slid the ring onto her finger and then pulled her into a tight embrace. Passers-by glanced at them with warmth, one elderly woman even clapping her hands quietly. When they returned home, Kathy immediately texted her parents, who took Anthony to his room to give them some time alone. "This is our new beginning, Kathy," Michael said, looking at her. "But it's also a continuation. The family I've found, the family we're building, it's everything I've ever lived for. I want Anthony to know this isn't just a new beginning for us, but for him too," she replied with a soft smile. The next day, they shared the news with Anthony. At first, the boy looked a little confused, but when he finally understood, he beamed with excitement and asked, "Does this mean I'll officially live with both Daddy and Aunt Kathy now?" "From now on, you'll be living with Mommy," Michael corrected gently, smiling warmly. Anthony giggled and hugged them both tightly. "That's so cool," he said enthusiastically. After a small but heartfelt wedding ceremony, they moved in together at Kathy's home. 9 months later, they welcomed a baby girl. Michael remained the devoted, caring man he'd proven himself to be, always doing everything he could to ensure his family felt loved. Anthony was overjoyed, spending his days with both his newfound father and his little sister. Sometimes Kathy found herself reflecting on the happy moments of their life together, remembering how it all began. The man lying unconscious in a hospital, her determination to help him recover, and the long road that had led them to this moment. This wasn't just a love story. It was a story of a family that had come together despite loss, mistakes, and years spent apart. And in the end, they had truly become a family, whole, strong, and filled with love. Did you enjoy this story? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. Give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to not miss new releases. See you soon.